The divorce papers arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered by a young man who looked embarrassed to be handing them to a 64-year-old woman in a floral apron who was still holding a cup of coffee and trying to understand why her husband of 42 years was seeking dissolution of marriage due to irreconcilable differences. I read the legal document 3 times before the words penetrated the shock that had settled over me like a thick fog. Robert Stevens, my husband, the father of my 3 children, the man who'd promised to love me until death do us part, was filing for divorce. Not separation, not marriage counseling, divorce. "Ma'am, I need you to sign here acknowledging receipt," the courier said gently, apparently recognizing the expression of someone whose world had just shifted off its axis. I signed with a shaking hand and closed the door, leaning against it as if I could somehow keep reality from entering our home. Our home that we'd bought 38 years ago when Jessica was still a toddler, where we'd raised 3 children and hosted countless family gatherings, where just last week I'd been planning our 43rd anniversary dinner. The house was quiet, except for the tick of the grandfather clock Robert had inherited from his parents, and the distant sound of Emily, my 8-year-old granddaughter, playing in the backyard while Jessica worked from home in the spare bedroom that had become her makeshift office during her divorce proceedings last year. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd been supporting Jessica through her own divorce, helping with childcare and emotional support, never imagining that I'd soon be facing the same devastating experience of having a marriage end without warning. My phone rang, jarring me from my stunned paralysis. Robert's name appeared on the screen, and for a moment I thought this might be some terrible mistake, that he was calling to explain that divorce papers had been filed accidentally, that we could work through whatever problems I'd apparently been too blind to see. "Catherine, I assume you received the papers." His voice was cold, businesslike, nothing like the warm tone he'd used to say goodbye when he left for work that morning. Nothing like the voice that had whispered, "I love you" in my ear just 3 nights ago after we'd watched a movie together on the couch. "Robert, I don't understand. What's happening? If there are problems in our marriage, why didn't you talk to me about them before?" "Catherine, there's no point in prolonging this. We've grown apart over the years. And it's time to acknowledge that we want different things from life." "What different things?" "Robert, we've been planning our retirement together. We talked about traveling, about spending more time with the grandchildren. What's changed?" "Everything has changed. I've retained an attorney, and you should do the same. This doesn't have to be contentious if we both approach it reasonably." Reasonably. As if the destruction of 4 decades of shared life was a business transaction that required nothing more than rational negotiation. "Robert, can we at least talk about this in person? Can you come home so we can—" "I won't be coming home, Catherine. I've moved into an apartment downtown. My attorney will be in contact about property division and the other practical matters." The line went dead, leaving me standing in the kitchen where I'd made breakfast for this man nearly every morning for 42 years, holding a phone that might as well have been a weapon for how effectively it had just destroyed my understanding of my own life. I sank into the kitchen chair where Robert had sat just hours earlier, reading the newspaper and commenting on the weather forecast for the week. How had I missed the signs that my husband was planning to leave me? How had I been so completely unaware that our marriage was ending while I was buttering his toast and asking if he wanted more coffee? "Grandma Kathy, are you okay?" Emily appeared in the kitchen doorway, her dark hair tied in the pigtails I'd braided that morning, her 8-year-old face creased with concern that no child should have to feel for the adults in her life. "I'm fine, sweetheart. Just reading some important papers." "You look sad. Is it about Grandpa Robert?" The question caught me off guard. Had Emily somehow sensed tension between Robert and me that I'd been blind to? Children were often more perceptive than adults gave them credit for. "Why would you ask about Grandpa Robert?" Emily climbed onto the chair beside me, her small hands reaching for mine with the instinctive comfort-giving that seemed natural to her personality. "He's been acting different lately, like when he talks on the phone and then hangs up real fast when you come in the room. And last week, when that lady came to the house, he told me not to tell you about it." My blood turned to ice. "What lady, Emily?" "The pretty lady with the yellow hair. She came to see Grandpa when you were at the grocery store. They sat in his office and talked for a long time, and when I asked Grandpa who she was, he said it was work stuff, and I shouldn't mention it to you because it would just worry you." I felt something cold settle in my stomach as I realized that Robert's decision to divorce me wasn't sudden at all. He'd been planning this, meeting with people, making arrangements while I'd been grocery shopping and living my normal life, completely unaware that my husband was systematically dismantling our marriage. "Emily, Did you hear what they talked about? Some of it. Grandpa doesn't know that I can hear grown-ups talking when I'm playing with my tablet in the next room. Emily's expression grew serious. Grandma Kathy, I don't think Grandpa is being very nice to you. What do you mean? The lady asked him questions about money and about you, and Grandpa said things that didn't sound very nice, like that you don't understand business stuff, and that you get confused about important things. Each word felt like a small knife wound. Robert had been discussing my supposed incompetence with strangers, building a case against my intelligence and capability, while I'd been lovingly maintaining our home and planning our future together. Emily, I need you to do something for me. This is very important, okay? Okay, Grandma. If Grandpa has any more visitors, or if you hear him talking about money or about me, I need you to tell me about it. Can you do that? Should I tell Mommy too? I thought about Jessica, who was dealing with her own divorce stress and the challenges of single motherhood while trying to rebuild her life and career. She didn't need the additional burden of her parents' marriage falling apart. Let's just keep this between us for now, sweetheart. Mommy has enough to worry about. Grandma Kathy, are you and Grandpa getting divorced like Mommy and Daddy did? The question hung in the air between us, and I realized I couldn't lie to Emily. She was already living through one family dissolution, and she deserved honesty about what was happening to the stability she'd found in our home. I don't know yet, Emily. Grandpa wants to get divorced, but I'm going to try to understand why and see if we can fix whatever's wrong. What if you can't fix it? Then you and I will figure out how to take care of each other, no matter what happens. Emily nodded with the solemn acceptance that children develop when they've learned that adult promises aren't always reliable, but that some adults can be trusted to do their best, even when their best might not be enough. That afternoon, after Emily had returned to her games and Jessica had emerged from her office work, I called the only divorce attorney I knew, Patricia Williams, who'd represented our neighbor during her divorce 5 years earlier. Mrs. Gillian, I can see you tomorrow morning at 9. Bring any financial documents you have access to. And, Mrs. Gillian? Yes? Don't sign anything your husband's attorney sends you without reviewing it with me first. These sudden divorce filings often involve more planning than the spouse realizes. As I hung up the phone, I looked around the kitchen that had been the heart of our family life for nearly 4 decades, trying to understand how I'd gone from planning anniversary dinners to scheduling divorce consultations in the span of a single morning. Some betrayals, I was beginning to realize, were so carefully planned that the victim never saw them coming until the damage was already complete. But some 8-year-olds noticed things that adults missed, and some grandmothers were stronger than their husbands assumed when they made the mistake of confusing kindness with weakness. Tomorrow, I would begin learning how to protect myself from a man I'd loved and trusted for 42 years. Tonight, I would try to figure out who I was when I wasn't someone's wife, someone's mother, someone's grandmother, someone whose identity had been built around caring for other people who apparently didn't value that care as much as I'd believed. Patricia Williams's law office was nothing like what I'd expected from the few divorce movies I'd seen over the years. Instead of cold marble and intimidating leather furniture, her office was warm and welcoming, filled with plants and family photos that suggested she understood that divorce was about broken families, not just broken contracts. Mrs. Gillian, tell me what happened yesterday and what you know about your husband's reasons for filing. I recounted Robert's phone call, the coldness in his voice, his claim about irreconcilable differences and growing apart, while Patricia took notes with the focused attention of someone who'd heard similar stories many times before. How were your finances managed during the marriage? Robert handled most of the investments and business decisions. I managed the household budget and day-to-day expenses, but he always said I didn't need to worry about the big picture financial planning. Patricia looked up from her notepad. Mrs. Gillian, do you have access to bank statements, investment accounts, tax returns, insurance policies? Some of them. Robert kept most of the financial papers in his home office, but I have access to our joint checking account, and I know where he keeps important documents. I need you to gather everything you can find before he changes passwords or restricts your access. In sudden divorce filings like this, there's often financial planning that the other spouse isn't aware of. What kind of financial planning? Hidden assets, transferred funds, undervalued properties. Mrs. Gillian, men don't usually file for divorce without having their financial ducks in a row, especially when they've been married for over 40 years and there are significant assets involved. The suggestion that Robert had been systematically planning to leave me while I'd been completely unaware made my stomach clench with a combination of humiliation and anger. Mrs. Gillian, you mentioned that your granddaughter overheard conversations between your husband and a woman with yellow hair. Can you describe what she told you in more detail? I repeated Emily's account of the secret meeting, the questions about money, Robert's comments about my supposed inability to understand business matters. That sounds like he was meeting with a financial advisor or investigator, possibly someone helping him catalog assets or prepare for property division. Mrs. Gillian, I need to ask you directly, do you think your husband is having an affair? The question hit me like cold water. In my shock about the divorce filing, I hadn't considered the possibility that Robert was leaving me for another woman. I don't know. He's been working late more often recently, and there have been phone calls that he takes in private, but I assumed it was work-related. 42-year marriages don't usually end suddenly without some catalyst. Either your husband has been hiding his dissatisfaction for years, or there's someone else involved who's motivated this decision. I thought about the past months, looking for signs I might have missed. Robert's increased attention to his appearance, his new cologne, his sudden interest in updating his wardrobe. Changes I'd attributed to midlife renewal rather than midlife crisis. There's something else, I said, remembering Emily's acute observations. My granddaughter said Robert told her not to mention the woman's visit to me because it would worry me. If it was just business, why the secrecy? Exactly. Mrs. Gillian, I want you to go home and document everything you can remember about recent changes in your husband's behavior. New routines, unexplained absences, changes in how he handles money or communication. And I want you to gather financial documents without making it obvious that you're doing so. Is that legal? You're married. Those documents belong to both of you until the court says otherwise. But Mrs. Gillian, once your husband realizes you're taking an active role in protecting your interests, he may become less cooperative or more aggressive in his tactics. I drove home with my head spinning from legal terminology and strategic considerations I'd never imagined I'd need to understand. 42 years of marriage had ended with a phone call and a legal document, and I was supposed to transform myself from trusting wife to suspicious adversary overnight. Emily was waiting for me in the kitchen, sitting at the table with homework spread around her like she was conducting important business from a very small office. Grandma Kathy, how was your meeting with the lawyer lady? How did you know I met with a lawyer? Because Mommy said you were getting help with Grandpa's paperwork, and I know what divorce lawyers are because Mommy had to talk to lots of them. 8 years old, and Emily already had more experience with family legal crises than most adults. The thought made me sad for the innocence she'd lost through her parents' divorce, and angry at Robert for putting her through another family breakdown. Emily, the lawyer lady wants to know more about the things you heard Grandpa talking about with the yellow-haired woman. Can you remember anything else they said? Emily set down her pencil and gave me the serious attention she reserved for important conversations. They talked about houses. The lady asked Grandpa if there were any properties you didn't know about, and Grandpa said yes, but that he'd been careful about keeping them separate. Properties I didn't know about? And they talked about money in other countries. The lady said something about offshore accounts and asked if you knew about them. Grandpa said you never paid attention to investment stuff, so it wouldn't be a problem. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature in the kitchen. Robert had been hiding assets from me, possibly for years, while I'd trusted him completely to manage our financial future. Emily, did they say anything else about money? The lady asked about your retirement account and whether Grandpa could use it for something. Grandpa said that was already being handled by someone named Marcus. Marcus. I'd never heard Robert mention anyone named Marcus, but apparently this person had access to my retirement savings. Grandma Kathy, are you going to be okay if Grandpa takes all the money? The question revealed how much Emily understood about divorce dynamics despite her age. She'd watched her mother struggle financially during separation proceedings, and now she was worried about my financial security. I don't know yet, sweetheart, but I'm learning how to protect myself, and I have help from people who understand these situations. Grandma Kathy, I want to help you too. Emily, you've already helped me so much by telling me about the conversations you heard. But honey, this isn't your job to fix. But I can keep listening, right? If Grandpa comes back and talks to more people about taking your money? I looked at my 8-year-old granddaughter, who was offering to spy on her grandfather to protect me from financial manipulation I'd been too trusting to recognize. Emily, only if it doesn't make you feel scared or worried. You're just a little girl, and this is grown-up business. I'm not scared of Grandpa. I'm mad at him for being mean to you. That evening, while Emily watched television and Jessica worked late on a project, I went through Robert's home office with the methodical attention Patricia Williams had recommended. I found bank statements for accounts I didn't know existed, investment portfolios with my name forged on signature pages, and correspondence with financial advisors who'd been moving our assets without my knowledge. But it was the letter I found in Robert's desk drawer that revealed the full scope of his betrayal. My dearest Sharon, the financial arrangements are progressing as planned. Catherine remains completely unaware of the asset transfers, and my attorney believes we can finalize everything within 6 months. The house will need to be sold, but Catherine's share will be significantly reduced once my separate property claims are established. I know this process is difficult for both of us, but soon we'll be free to build the life we've planned together. Thank you for your patience while I handle the complications of ending a 42-year marriage to someone who never understood that people change and relationships evolve. All my love, Robert. P.S. Catherine's granddaughter has been asking questions, but she's only 8 years old. Children don't understand adult relationships, so there's no concern about her interference. I read the letter 3 times, feeling my shock transform into something harder and more determined. Robert hadn't just planned to leave me. He'd planned to financially devastate me while building a new life with a woman named Sharon, dismissing both my intelligence and Emily's perceptiveness in the process. Some husbands, I was learning, confused their wives' trust with their wives' stupidity. But some 8-year-old granddaughters noticed details that adults underestimated, and some 64-year-old women were stronger than the men who'd taken their kindness for granted for 4 decades. Tomorrow, I would show Patricia Williams the evidence that would change everything about my divorce proceedings. Tonight, I would stop being the trusting wife who'd been betrayed and start being the determined woman who would ensure that Robert's carefully laid plans had consequences he'd never anticipated. Patricia Williams' reaction to Robert's letter and the financial documents I discovered was immediate and intense. She read everything twice, made copies, and then looked at me with an expression that combined professional satisfaction with genuine anger on my behalf. Mrs. Gillian, your husband has made several critical mistakes. First, he's documented his intent to defraud you of marital assets. Second, he's underestimated both your intelligence and your granddaughter's observational skills. And third, he's assumed that being married to you for 42 years means he knows what you're capable of when you're properly motivated. What does this mean for the divorce proceedings? It means we're going to turn his own strategy against him. Hidden assets, forged signatures, secret transfers. These aren't just grounds for an unequal distribution of property. They're potentially criminal acts that could result in fraud charges. I felt something shift inside my chest, a hardening that replaced the shock and grief I'd been carrying since Tuesday morning. Robert had spent months, maybe years, planning to destroy my financial security while I'd been lovingly maintaining our home and planning our retirement together. Mrs. Williams, I want to fight this. All of it. Good. Because Mrs. Gillian, based on what you've discovered, you're potentially worth significantly more than your husband wants you to know. These offshore accounts, the hidden property investments, the retirement fund manipulations, we're looking at assets that could total well over $1 million that he's trying to keep from you. $1 million. I thought about my modest lifestyle, my careful budgeting, my assumption that we were comfortable but not wealthy. Meanwhile, Robert had been building a secret fortune while telling me I didn't need to worry about the complicated financial matters. What happens next? Next, we file an emergency motion to freeze all assets until we can conduct a complete financial investigation. And Mrs. Gillian, we're going to need Emily's testimony about the conversation she overheard. Emily's testimony? She's 8 years old. 8-year-old witnesses are more common than you'd think in divorce proceedings, especially when they've observed financial planning meetings or conversations about hidden assets. Children often see and hear things that adults assume they'll ignore or forget. I thought about Emily, about her serious attention to adult conversations, about her protective instincts toward me, and her anger at Robert's meanness. She was mature for her age, but asking her to testify against her grandfather felt enormous. Would she have to appear in court? Possibly, but we'd request a private meeting with the judge rather than open court proceedings. Mrs. Gillian, Emily's observations are currently our strongest evidence of your husband's premeditated fraud. That evening, I sat down with Emily and Jessica to explain the situation carefully. Jessica's reaction was immediate and explosive. Dad has been hiding money? For how long? I don't know yet. The lawyer is investigating, but it appears he's been planning this divorce for at least a year. maybe longer. Mom, I am so sorry. When you were helping me through my divorce, dealing with childcare and emotional support, Dad was planning to do the same thing to you? It appears so. Emily listened to our conversation with the focused attention she gave to important information, then asked the question that cut straight to the heart of the matter. Grandma Kathy, if Grandpa has been lying about money, what else has he been lying about? What do you mean, sweetheart? Like the lady with yellow hair. Is she Grandpa's girlfriend? Jessica and I looked at each other, realizing that Emily had probably observed more about Robert's relationship with Sharon than any of us had understood. Emily, what makes you think she might be Grandpa's girlfriend? Because last week when she came to the house, I saw them hugging through the window, and Grandpa gave her a present that looked like jewelry. And when she left, Grandpa watched her car drive away like Daddy used to watch Mommy when they were still married. The image of Robert giving jewelry to another woman, while I'd been completely unaware of her existence, made my stomach clench with a new kind of pain. Financial betrayal was devastating, but romantic betrayal felt like a different category of cruelty. Emily, Jessica said gently, the lawyer needs to know about the things you saw and heard. Would you be willing to talk to her about Grandpa and the yellow-haired lady? Will Grandpa get in trouble? Grandpa might get in trouble for lying about money and not being honest with Grandma Kathy. Emily considered this with 8-year-old logic that didn't make excuses for adult behavior. Good. When people lie and hurt other people, they should get in trouble. The next morning, Patricia Williams interviewed Emily in her office with Jessica and me present. Emily answered questions with remarkable clarity and detail, describing conversations, dates, and specific comments she'd overheard with the accuracy of someone who'd been paying careful attention to adult behavior that didn't make sense. Emily, you said the lady asked Grandpa about properties that Grandma Kathy didn't know about. Can you remember exactly what Grandpa said? Grandpa said he had been careful to buy houses and things in ways that Grandma couldn't find out about them. He said it was important for their future together. Their future together? The ladies' and Grandpa's future. They talked about getting married and moving to Florida, where it would be warm and they could play golf every day. Patricia and I exchanged glances. Robert had been planning not just divorce, but remarriage and relocation, all funded by assets he was hiding from me. Emily, did they mention anything about Grandma's money specifically? They talked about Grandma's teacher retirement account. Grandpa said that someone named Marcus was helping him understand how to use that money for their plans. Use Grandma's retirement money for their plans? Yes. The lady said it was smart that Grandpa had access to Grandma's accounts because she would never notice if money went missing gradually. I felt rage building in my chest as I realized the full scope of Robert's financial manipulation. He'd been systematically stealing from my retirement savings to fund his secret life with Sharon, assuming I was too trusting or too stupid to notice. After Emily's interview, Patricia walked us to her car with the expression of someone who'd just been handed a winning case. Mrs. Jillian, your granddaughter has provided testimony that documents systematic financial fraud, asset concealment, and potentially criminal theft from your retirement accounts. We're going to destroy your husband's divorce strategy. What happens now? Now we file motions that will freeze every account, investigate every hidden asset, and force your husband to explain where every dollar has gone for the past 5 years. And Mrs. Jillian? Yes? We're going to request that all proceedings be conducted with full transparency, including any testimony from your granddaughter that the court deems relevant. As we drove home, Emily asked the question that had been hanging over all of us since this nightmare began. Grandma Kathy, when the judge hears about all the bad things Grandpa did, will you get to keep your house? I hope so, sweetheart. And will you have enough money to take care of yourself? I think I might have more money than I realized. But Emily, even if I didn't, we'd figure out how to take care of each other. Good, because I don't want you to be sad anymore. I looked in the rearview mirror at my 8-year-old granddaughter, who'd somehow become my most effective ally in fighting a battle I'd never expected to face, and realized that sometimes the most powerful advocates came in the smallest packages. Some husbands made the mistake of underestimating both their wives and their grandchildren, but some 8-year-olds had better moral compasses than the adults who thought children weren't paying attention to conversations that would determine their family's future. Tomorrow, Robert would learn that his carefully planned financial betrayal had been observed, documented, and reported by the granddaughter he'd dismissed as too young to understand adult relationships. Some surprises I was beginning to understand were worth waiting 64 years to deliver. Robert's reaction to the asset freeze order was swift and predictable. My phone rang at 7:23 a.m., less than 12 hours after Patricia Williams had filed the emergency motions that locked down every account, investment, and property transfer he'd made in the past 5 years. "Catherine, what the hell do you think you're doing? My attorney says you've frozen our joint accounts and you're demanding access to private investment records." His voice carried a fury I'd rarely heard in 4 decades of marriage, the anger of someone whose carefully laid plans had been disrupted by an opponent he'd underestimated. "I'm protecting myself from financial fraud, Robert." Which is what people do when they discover their spouses have been hiding assets and stealing from their retirement accounts. Stealing? Catherine, you don't understand complex financial planning. Everything I've done has been legal investment management, including the offshore accounts you never told me about, including forging my signature on investment transfers, including giving Sharon access to my teacher's retirement fund. The silence on the other end of the line told me everything I needed to know. Robert hadn't expected me to discover the full scope of his financial manipulations, and he certainly hadn't expected me to know about Sharon's involvement in planning our divorce. "Catherine, I don't know what you think you found, but you're making a serious mistake by turning this into a contentious legal battle. I was trying to handle our separation quietly and fairly." "Fairly? Robert, you've been planning to leave me with virtually nothing while you and your girlfriend build a new life in Florida with money you've stolen from my retirement savings. How did you—" He caught himself, realizing he'd been about to admit to knowledge he shouldn't possess if his activities had been as secret as he'd assumed. "How did I find out about your plans? Let's just say that people notice more than you think they do. Catherine, we need to talk in person. There are things about our situation that you don't understand. The only thing I don't understand is how I lived with someone for 42 years without realizing he was capable of this level of deception." I hung up before he could respond, my hands shaking with adrenaline and anger. For the first time since receiving the divorce papers, I felt like I was taking action rather than just reacting to Robert's carefully orchestrated destruction of our marriage. Emily found me in the kitchen an hour later, still processing the conversation and trying to prepare breakfast with hands that wouldn't quite stop trembling. "Grandma Kathy, was that Grandpa on the phone? You sounded mad." "Yes, sweetheart. Grandpa is upset because the lawyer made it so he can't move any more money around until the judge decides what belongs to him and what belongs to me." "Good. Is he in trouble now?" "He's starting to get in trouble. The judge is going to want to hear about all the things you observed, Emily." "Like what?" "Like the conversations you heard about hidden houses and money in other countries. Like seeing him give jewelry to the lady with yellow hair. Like what they said about using my retirement money for their plans." Emily nodded with the gravity of someone who understood that her observations had become evidence in a case that would determine her family's future. "Grandma Kathy, I remembered something else. Last month when Grandpa thought I was taking a nap, I heard him talking to someone on the phone about buying a house in Florida. He said he and Sharon needed to close on it quickly before the divorce papers were filed." "Sharon? You heard him say Sharon's name?" "Yes. And he said they needed to use your name on some papers because Sharon's credit wasn't good enough to get approved for the loan." I felt a cold fury settle in my chest. Robert had been using my credit rating to purchase property for himself and his girlfriend, probably planning to transfer ownership after our divorce was finalized, and I had no legal recourse. "Emily, would you be willing to tell the lawyer about this conversation too? Will it help you keep Grandpa from taking all your money?" "Yes, sweetheart. It will help a lot." That afternoon, Patricia Williams scheduled another interview with Emily, this time focusing specifically on any conversations she'd heard about property purchases or financial planning. Emily's memory was remarkably detailed, providing dates, specific phrases, and context that painted a clear picture of systematic fraud. "Emily, when Grandpa talked about using Grandma's name on papers, did he explain why that was necessary?" "He said Sharon had made some mistakes with money in the past, so they needed to be clever about how they bought things together." "Clever how?" "By putting Grandma's name on papers, even though Grandma didn't know about it. Grandpa said it wasn't lying. It was just being smart about legal stuff." Patricia looked at me with an expression that suggested Robert had provided enough documented evidence to build a criminal case, not just a divorce proceeding. "Mrs. Gillian, your husband has been committing identity fraud by using your name and credit rating for purchases you didn't authorize. This goes well beyond hiding marital assets. What does that mean legally?" "It means we're going to request a full forensic accounting of every financial transaction he's made in the past 5 years. And Mrs. Gillian, we're going to ask the court to award you significant damages for the financial fraud, in addition to your rightful share of marital property." That evening, Jessica and I sat down with Emily to discuss what would happen when her testimony became part of the court proceedings. Emily, the judge is going to want to hear directly from you about the things you saw and heard. Are you okay with talking to a judge? Will Grandpa be there? Probably, but you'll be talking to the judge, not to Grandpa. And Mommy and I will be there with you. What if Grandpa gets really mad at me for telling the judge about his secrets? I knelt down to Emily's eye level, taking her hands in mine. Emily, you're not responsible for Grandpa's choices. You're not responsible for his secrets, or his lies, or his anger. You're just responsible for telling the truth about what you saw and heard. But what if telling the truth hurts Grandpa's feelings? Sweetheart, Grandpa hurt my feelings by lying and stealing money and planning to leave me with nothing. Sometimes people have to face consequences for the choices they make, even when those consequences hurt their feelings. Emily processed this with the moral clarity that children often bring to complex adult situations. So if I tell the truth and Grandpa gets in trouble, that's because of what Grandpa did, not because of what I said? Exactly. Okay, I'll tell the judge everything I heard, because you took care of me and Mommy when Daddy left, and now I want to help take care of you. As I tucked Emily into bed that night, I marveled at the 8-year-old who'd become my most powerful ally in fighting a battle I'd never wanted to face. She'd observed adult deception with clear eyes, remembered details that would prove crucial to my case, and chosen to protect me despite her natural loyalty to her grandfather. Some families, I was learning, were held together not by blood or law, but by people who chose to do the right thing even when the right thing was difficult. And some 8-year-olds had more integrity than the adults who thought children weren't paying attention to conversations that would determine everyone's future. Tomorrow, Emily would help me prove that Robert's financial betrayal had been even more extensive and deliberate than we'd initially understood. But tonight, I would be grateful for a granddaughter who'd chosen truth over convenience, protection over politics, and love over loyalty to someone who'd proven he didn't deserve it. The day before our court hearing, Patricia Williams called with news that made my stomach flutter with nervous anticipation. Mrs. Jillian, the forensic accountant, has completed the asset investigation, and the results are extraordinary. Your husband didn't just hide money from you. He built an entire financial empire while you were unaware it existed. What kind of empire? Offshore accounts totaling $1.2 million, 3 investment properties in Florida, a vacation home in Colorado, and stock portfolios worth approximately $800,000. All purchased or funded with marital assets that he systematically moved into accounts with only his name attached. I sat down heavily in my kitchen chair, trying to process numbers that seemed impossible given my understanding of our financial situation. Patricia, how is that possible? I managed our household budget. I would have noticed if hundreds of thousands of dollars were disappearing from our accounts. He was very sophisticated about it. Small transfers over time, redirected dividends, investment gains that were reinvested into hidden accounts rather than reported to you. Mrs. Gillian, your husband spent years systematically stealing your marital assets while convincing you that you didn't understand financial management well enough to be involved in investment decisions. And Emily's testimony about the property purchase? The Florida house is real. Purchased 18 months ago for $650,000 using a loan application with your forged signature as co-borrower. Sharon Patterson, that's your husband's girlfriend's full name, is listed as the intended resident, but your name is on all the legal documents. Sharon Patterson. Even her name felt like a betrayal, proof that while I'd been planning our 43rd anniversary celebration, Robert had been building a future with another woman using money he'd stolen from me. What happens at tomorrow's hearing? Judge Morrison will review the forensic evidence, hear testimony from witnesses, and make preliminary rulings about asset division and fraud claims. Mrs. Jillian, Emily's testimony will be crucial because she's the only witness to conversations that documented your husband's intent to defraud you. That evening, I tried to prepare Emily for what would happen the next day, but she seemed more composed about the court appearance than I felt. Grandma Kathy, will Grandpa be there with his girlfriend? I don't know if Sharon will be there, but Grandpa will be there with his lawyer. What if Grandpa tries to say I'm lying about what I heard? Then the judge will decide who to believe. But Emily, you're not lying, are you? No. I remember everything exactly because it didn't make sense why Grandpa would be planning things without telling you. Why didn't it make sense to you? Because married people are supposed to make plans together. That's what Mommy and Daddy used to do before they started fighting all the time. 8-year-old wisdom about marriage that her grandfather had apparently forgotten during his years of secret planning and financial betrayal. The family court building was smaller and less intimidating than I'd expected, with a children's waiting area that suggested Emily wouldn't be the first young witness to testify in divorce proceedings. Judge Morrison was a woman in her 50s who looked at Emily with the kind of patient attention that children needed when facing adult legal situations. "Emily, do you understand why you're here today?" "Yes, ma'am. I'm here to tell you about the things I heard Grandpa saying about money and about the lady who comes to visit him. Have any of the grown-ups told you what to say today?" "No, ma'am. Grandma Kathy just told me to tell the truth about what I saw and heard." "Good. Emily, I'm going to ask you some questions, and you should only answer if you remember clearly. If you don't remember something, it's okay to say you don't know." For the next 20 minutes, Emily recounted conversations with remarkable precision, describing dates, locations, and specific phrases she'd overheard during Robert's meetings with Sharon and financial advisors. Her testimony was delivered in the matter-of-fact tone children use when reporting observable facts, without dramatic emphasis or apparent awareness of how damaging her words were to Robert's case. "Emily, you said you heard Grandpa talking about houses that Grandma didn't know about. Can you tell me exactly what he said?" "He said he had been careful to buy houses and things in ways that Grandma couldn't find out about them, because it was important for his and Sharon's future together." "And you heard him mention your grandmother's retirement money?" "Yes, ma'am. He said someone named Marcus was helping him figure out how to use Grandma's teacher money for their plans, and Sharon said it was smart that he had access to Grandma's accounts, because she would never notice if money went missing gradually." Judge Morrison looked at Robert, who was sitting with his attorney, and looking progressively paler as Emily's testimony revealed the scope of his financial manipulation. "Emily, did you ever see Grandpa give Sharon any gifts?" "Yes, ma'am. I saw him give her a jewelry box that looked like the one he gave Grandma for their anniversary last year, except this one was bigger." "How do you know it was the same kind of jewelry box?" "Because I helped Grandpa pick out Grandma's anniversary present at the jewelry store downtown. The man at the store said Grandpa was a good customer because he bought expensive things there a lot." I felt a chill as I realized Robert had been buying jewelry for Sharon with the same frequency and from the same store where he'd purchased my anniversary gifts, as if maintaining two romantic relationships was simply a matter of organizing his shopping schedule efficiently. After Emily finished her testimony and was escorted to the children's area with a victim advocate, Judge Morrison addressed Robert directly. "Mr. Stevens, your granddaughter has provided very specific testimony about conversations she overheard regarding hidden assets, forged signatures, and unauthorized use of your wife's credit rating and retirement funds. How do you respond to these allegations?" Robert's attorney whispered urgently in his ear before he answered. "Your Honor, children often misunderstand adult conversations. Emily may have heard fragments of discussions about legitimate financial planning and misinterpreted them as something secretive or improper. Mr. Stevens, the forensic accounting has confirmed the existence of hidden offshore accounts, undisclosed properties, and forged loan documents. Are you claiming that an 8-year-old child imagined detailed financial conversations that precisely match fraudulent activities documented by professional investigators?" "Your Honor, I may have made some investment decisions without fully consulting my wife, but everything I did was intended to benefit our family's long-term financial security." Judge Morrison consulted her notes, then looked at Robert with the expression of someone who'd heard too many elaborate justifications for straightforward dishonesty. "Mr. Stevens, transferring marital assets into hidden accounts, using your wife's identity to obtain loans for property she's never seen, and systematically depleting her retirement savings to fund a relationship with another woman does not constitute family financial planning. It constitutes fraud. Your Honor, Mr. Stevens, I'm granting Mrs. Gillian's motion for exclusive access to all marital assets pending full investigation of potential criminal charges. You're also prohibited from making any further financial transactions or property transfers without court approval." As we left the courthouse, Patricia Williams explained what Judge Morrison's ruling meant for my financial future. "Mrs. Gillian, you're going to recover not just your fair share of marital property, but significant additional damages for the financial fraud. Your husband's attempt to hide assets has backfired completely. What about the Florida house? It's going to be sold, and you'll receive the proceeds since it was purchased with stolen marital assets and your forged signature." Emily walked between Jessica and me toward the parking lot, holding both our hands and looking satisfied in the way children do when they've successfully completed an important task. "Grandma Kathy, did I help you?" "Emily, you saved me. You saved our family. You made sure that Grandpa couldn't steal money that belonged to both of us." "Good. I didn't like that he was being mean to you and lying about it. As we drove home, I realized that my 8-year-old granddaughter had accomplished something that months of private investigation might not have achieved. She documented Robert's fraud in real time, with the clear-eyed honesty that children bring to adult situations that don't make moral sense. Some witnesses, I was learning, were more powerful because they had no agenda beyond protecting people they loved. And some truth was so simple that it took a child to recognize it and brave enough to speak it, even when the adults involved were trying to hide behind sophisticated lies and legal complications. Tomorrow, I would begin rebuilding my life with financial security I'd never known I deserved. Tonight, I would be grateful for the granddaughter who'd refused to let her grandfather's betrayal go unnoticed or unpunished. 3 months after Judge Morrison's preliminary ruling, I was sitting in my lawyer's office reviewing settlement documents that still seemed too good to be real. The forensic accounting had revealed even more hidden assets than initially discovered, bringing the total value of Robert's secret financial empire to over $2.8 million. Mrs. Gillian, your husband's attorney has agreed to the settlement terms rather than face criminal fraud charges. You'll receive the house, $9 million in recovered hidden assets and monthly spousal support of $4,200. Additionally, Mr. Stevens will pay all legal fees for both sides. I looked at the numbers on the settlement papers, trying to reconcile them with the modest lifestyle I'd lived for 4 decades while believing we were comfortable but not wealthy. Patricia, how did I not know we had this much money? Because your husband was very systematic about hiding wealth accumulation from you. Every dividend, every investment gain, every rental income from the properties you didn't know existed, all of it was diverted into accounts you couldn't access or even see. And Emily's testimony was crucial to proving this? Essential. Without her observations about the planning meetings and conversations about using your identity for fraudulent transactions, we would have had a much harder time proving intent to defraud. Your granddaughter's testimony demonstrated that this wasn't just poor financial communication. It was deliberate theft. That afternoon, I drove to Jessica's house to share the news with Emily, who'd spent the past 3 months asking periodic questions about whether Grandpa was still in trouble and whether I would have enough money to keep the house. Emily, I have good news. The judge decided that Grandpa has to give back all the money he took from me, plus extra money to make up for lying and hiding things. Does that mean you're rich now, Grandma Kathy? It means I have enough money to take care of myself and help take care of you and Mommy for the rest of my life. What about Grandpa? Will he have enough money? Even after everything Robert had done, Emily's question revealed the complicated loyalty children feel toward family members who've disappointed them. She was angry at her grandfather's dishonesty, but she didn't want him to suffer. Grandpa will have enough money to live comfortably, but he won't be able to hide money or lie about it anymore. And he can't live with Sharon in the Florida house? The Florida house is being sold, and that money will come to me since Grandpa bought it with money that belonged to both of us. Emily processed this information with the satisfaction of someone who'd helped solve a problem that had been worrying her for months. Grandma Kathy, now that you have lots of money, will you still live in our house? Or will you move to a big fancy house like the people on TV? The question revealed Emily's deeper concern, that financial changes might disrupt the stability we'd rebuilt after her parents' divorce and my separation from Robert. Emily, I'm staying in our house, but having more money means I can make some improvements, and I can help other grandmothers who might be going through what I went through. What kind of help? There are lots of women whose husbands hide money from them or lie about divorce things. I want to use some of my money to help them get good lawyers and fight for what belongs to them. Like a superhero, but for divorce stuff? Something like that. 2 weeks later, I received an unexpected phone call from Robert. I hadn't spoken to him since the asset freeze order 3 months earlier, and hearing his voice brought back a mixture of emotions I'd thought I'd resolved. Catherine, I wanted to call before the final papers are signed tomorrow. What do you want, Robert? I want to apologize, not because my attorney told me to, but because I need you to know that I understand what I did to you was wrong. I waited, unsure whether this was genuine remorse or another manipulation designed to achieve some purpose I couldn't identify. Catherine, I spent years convincing myself that I was protecting you from financial complexity, that managing investments and planning for retirement was too stressful for you to handle. But the truth is, I was protecting myself from having to include you in decisions that would have revealed how much of our money I was spending on Sharon. How long, Robert? How long were you planning to leave me? I met Sharon 3 years ago. The relationship became serious about 2 years ago. The financial planning, that started about 18 months ago when I realized I wanted to divorce you but didn't want to give up the lifestyle I'd become accustomed to. 2 years of marriage counseling conversations where I'd asked if there were problems we needed to address. 2 years of anniversary dinners and Christmas mornings and family gatherings where I'd been completely unaware that my husband was building an exit strategy that would leave me financially devastated. Robert, what hurts the most isn't even the money. It's that you let me love you and plan our future together while you were systematically betraying everything we'd built. I know. And Catherine, I need you to know that Emily's testimony wasn't vindictive. She was protecting you in ways that I should have been protecting you. Emily shouldn't have had to protect me from my own husband. No, she shouldn't have. But I'm grateful that she did, because what I was planning to do to you was inexcusable. Why are you telling me this now? Because tomorrow this will all be legally finished, and I wanted you to hear from me that you didn't deserve what I did to you. You were a good wife, a good mother, a good person who trusted me to be honest about our life together. And you weren't honest. No, I wasn't. Catherine, I don't expect forgiveness, but I wanted you to know that losing you and Emily's respect has been the most painful consequence of the choices I made. After we hung up, I sat in my kitchen in my house, which would remain my home for as long as I wanted to live there, and thought about forgiveness, consequences, and the difference between apologies and accountability. Robert's words sounded genuine, but they came after he'd been caught, prosecuted, and forced to face financial and legal consequences for his actions. I couldn't know whether his remorse was authentic or strategic, whether he regretted hurting me or regretted getting caught. Grandma Kathy, was that Grandpa on the phone? Emily appeared in the kitchen doorway, her school backpack slung over one shoulder and her expression curious but wary. Yes, sweetheart. Grandpa called to apologize for the things he did. Do you forgive him? I'm not sure yet. What do you think? I think saying sorry is good, but it doesn't fix the things that got broken. 8-year-old wisdom about the difference between apologies and repair, between regret and restitution. Emily, are you glad you told the judge about the things you heard Grandpa saying? Yes, because you needed help and grown-ups weren't paying attention, so I had to pay attention instead. Do you think you'll forgive Grandpa eventually? Maybe, but first, I want to see if he learns how to be honest about things instead of hiding them. That evening, as I signed the final divorce papers that would end 42 years of marriage and secure my financial future, I thought about the 8-year-old granddaughter who'd refused to let adult dishonesty go unchallenged. Emily had seen what I'd missed, heard what I'd never suspected, and chosen to protect me when the person who'd promised to protect me had chosen to betray me instead. Some families, I was learning, were held together by people who chose courage over convenience, truth over loyalty, and protection over politics. And some grandmothers discovered that their greatest teachers came in 8-year-old packages with clear moral compasses and the bravery to speak truth, even when truth was uncomfortable for the adults who'd forgotten how to recognize it. 6 months later, I was standing in the downtown office space I'd rented for the Catherine Gillian Foundation for Women's Financial Justice, watching volunteers arrange intake forms and legal resource materials for our official opening next week. The foundation would provide free legal consultations, financial literacy education, and emergency support for women over 50 who were facing divorce proceedings complicated by hidden assets or financial fraud. Mrs. Gillian, the attorney referral network is complete, said Sandra Martinez, the retired social worker I'd hired as the foundation's director. We have 12 divorce attorneys who've agreed to provide reduced fee services for foundation clients, plus 2 forensic accountants who'll volunteer 10 hours monthly for asset investigation. I looked around the space. 3 consultation rooms, a resource library, a children's area where kids could wait while their mothers met with advocates, and felt pride in something I'd built rather than something I'd inherited or received. Sandra, have we received many intake calls? 27 women have requested consultations since we announced the foundation last month. Mrs. Gillian, the need for these services is much greater than I anticipated. 27 women, probably dealing with variations of what I'd experienced. Husbands who'd confused their wives' trust with their wives' stupidity, financial betrayals disguised as protection, carefully planned divorces that would leave wives devastated while husbands preserved their wealth and started new lives. Mrs. Gillian? Emily's voice came from the children's area, where she was arranging books and toys for the kids who would accompany their mothers to foundation meetings. Can I ask you something? Of course, sweetheart. Are all the ladies who come here going to have husbands who lied like Grandpa did? Some of them, yes. Some will have husbands who hid money, or who tried to make their wives think they weren't smart enough to understand financial things. That's mean. Yes, it is mean. But Emily, what we're doing here is helping these ladies fight back and get what belongs to them. Like I helped you fight back? Exactly like that. You showed me that even when someone tries to make you feel small or ignored, you can still pay attention and tell the truth about what you see. Emily nodded with the satisfaction of someone whose efforts had created something larger than herself. At 9 years old now, she understood that her testimony had not only saved my financial future, but had become the foundation for helping other women in similar situations. Mrs. Gillian, Sandra called from her desk. There's a woman on the phone who specifically asked to speak with you. She says she heard about the foundation from her granddaughter, who read about Emily's court testimony in a newspaper article. I took the call in my private office, settling into the chair that faced a wall covered with thank you letters from women who'd successfully challenged hidden assets and fraudulent divorce tactics. Mrs. Gillian, this is Patricia Thompson. My granddaughter Amy read about your story and your foundation, and she insisted I call you. What's your situation, Patricia? My husband filed for divorce last month after 38 years of marriage. He's claiming that I don't understand our financial situation well enough to participate in property division decisions, and his attorney is suggesting that I accept a small settlement to avoid complicated legal proceedings. Have you discovered any evidence of hidden assets? That's the thing, Mrs. Gillian. Amy has been staying with us while her parents are deployed overseas, and she's been asking questions about things that don't make sense to her. Like why Grandpa gets so many bank statements mailed to our neighbor's house, and why he has meetings with people who tell her not to mention their visits to me. I felt a familiar chill. Another observant child, another grandfather who'd underestimated what children notice, another family where financial betrayal was being documented by someone too young to understand why adults would lie about money. Patricia, how old is Amy? 10. And Mrs. Gillian, she's been writing down things she hears, dates and names and conversations, because she said what happened to your family made her realize that sometimes children need to help protect their grandmothers. Amy has been documenting your husband's financial activities. She has a notebook where she records when strange people come to visit, what she hears them talking about, and questions she has about why Grandpa tells her not to mention certain things to me. Mrs. Gillian, I think my granddaughter may have uncovered evidence that my husband is hiding assets the same way yours did. 2 hours later, I was sitting in Patricia Thompson's living room, listening to 10-year-old Amy read from a spiral notebook filled with observations that revealed systematic financial fraud strikingly similar to what Robert had perpetrated against me. Mrs. Gillian, last Tuesday a lady came to see Grandpa while Grandma was at her book club. They talked about something called offshore accounts and whether Grandma knew about money in other countries. Grandpa said Grandma never asked questions about money stuff so she wouldn't find out. Amy, did they mention specific amounts of money? The lady said Grandpa had been smart to move over $1 million to places where Grandma couldn't see it. Grandpa said that when the divorce was final, he and the lady could get married and buy a house in Arizona with money that Grandma would never know existed. Patricia looked at me with the expression of someone whose worst suspicions were being confirmed by her granddaughter's careful documentation. Mrs. Gillian, Amy has been keeping this notebook for 6 weeks. She has dates, names, specific conversations, even license plate numbers of people who visited when I wasn't home. Amy, why did you start writing these things down? Because Grandma has been sad lately, and Grandpa has been acting weird. And when I read about Emily helping her grandmother, I thought maybe I should pay attention too, in case Grandma needed help. I looked at Amy's notebook, filled with the kind of detailed observations that would prove invaluable in a forensic investigation, and realized that Emily's story had inspired other children to become advocates for family members facing financial betrayal. Patricia, with Amy's documentation and the Foundation's resources, we can build a case that will recover your hidden assets and ensure you receive fair property division. What will this cost? I'm already worried about legal fees, and my husband keeps telling me that fighting him in court will be too expensive for me to afford. The Foundation covers initial legal costs for qualifying clients. Patricia, your husband is betting that you'll accept a small settlement because you think you can't afford to fight for what belongs to you. He's wrong. That evening, Emily and I were reviewing Amy's notebook in my kitchen, with Emily offering advice about what information would be most helpful to lawyers and investigators. Grandma Kathy, Amy did a really good job writing down important things. She even drew pictures of some of the people who came to visit her grandpa. Emily, how does it feel to know that your story inspired Amy to help her grandmother? It feels good. Like when I helped you, it wasn't just for our family. It was showing other kids that they could help their families too. Do you think there are other children out there who might be noticing things that could help their grandmothers? Probably. Kids notice lots of things that grown-ups think we don't understand. I looked at my granddaughter, who at 9 years old had become an unofficial consultant for other children documenting family financial fraud, and realized that her courage had created something larger than justice for our own situation. Emily, what do you think about the foundation, about helping all these other ladies? I think it's like what you always taught me. When something bad happens to you, you can choose to let it make you sad forever, or you can use it to help other people so the same bad thing doesn't happen to them. And which choice did we make? We chose to help other people. And Grandma Kathy? Yes, sweetheart? I think Grandpa Robert accidentally did us a favor by being so dishonest, because now we get to help lots of grandmas and their kids instead of just worrying about ourselves. Some betrayals, I was learning, could be transformed into purposes that outlasted the people who created them. Some 9-year-olds understood justice better than many adults, and some foundations were built on the simple recognition that children's observations could be more powerful than professional investigations when they were motivated by love rather than strategy. Tomorrow, Patricia Thompson and Amy would begin the process of documenting and recovering hidden assets that could total over $1 million. Tonight, I would be grateful for the granddaughter who'd shown other children that protecting their families sometimes required paying attention when adults assumed no one was watching, and speaking truth when adults preferred convenient lies. 1 year after the foundation's opening, I was preparing for our first annual gala when Emily rushed into the event planning office with a newspaper article clutched in her small hands and an expression of barely contained excitement on her face. "Grandma Kathy, look, we're famous." The headline read, "Foundation led by fraud victim helps 200 women recover $15 million in hidden assets." Below it was a photo of me standing outside our downtown office with Sandra Martinez and several clients who'd successfully challenged their husband's financial deception. The reporter talked to lots of the ladies we helped, Emily continued, reading from the article with growing pride. Mrs. Thompson recovered $2 million that her husband hid in offshore accounts. Mrs. Peterson found out her husband had been stealing from her business for 8 years, and Mrs. Williams discovered that her husband bought 3 houses she didn't know existed. I read over Emily's shoulder, marveling at the scope of what we'd accomplished in just 12 months. 200 women, $15 million in recovered assets, countless families where children had provided crucial testimony about financial conversations they'd witnessed. Emily, look at this part about you. The article included a sidebar titled Young Heroes, Children Who Exposed Family Financial Fraud that featured Emily prominently. Emily Stevens, now 9, was 8 years old when she testified about secret conversations she'd overheard between her grandfather and his girlfriend about hiding money from her grandmother. Her detailed observations helped recover $1.9 million in fraudulent transfers and inspired the creation of the Catherine Gillian Foundation. Since then, Emily has become an informal mentor to other children whose observations have uncovered similar financial deception. Grandma Kathy, does this mean other kids are doing what I did? Exactly what you did, paying attention, asking questions, and helping protect their families from people who think children don't notice important things. The phone rang before Emily could respond. Sandra's voice was excited when I answered. "Mrs. Gillian, Channel 7 wants to interview you and Emily for their weekend feature story about the foundation. They're particularly interested in how children's testimony has become crucial evidence in financial fraud cases." I looked at Emily, who was already nodding enthusiastically, before I could ask her opinion about being interviewed on television. "Sandra, schedule it for tomorrow afternoon. And Sandra, see if Amy Thompson can participate too. Her case has become one of our most successful recoveries." 2 days later, I was sitting in the Channel 7 studio with Emily and Amy, watching both girls explain to reporter Janet Morrison how they documented their grandfather's financial deception with the matter-of-fact precision that children bring to observable facts. "Emily, you were 8 when you first realized your grandfather was hiding things from your grandmother. What made you decide to pay attention to adult conversations? Because Grandma Kathy was sad, and I didn't understand why Grandpa was having secret meetings with people who told me not to mention them. When adults tell kids to keep secrets from other adults, that usually means something bad is happening. Amy, your notebook documentation helped recover over $1 million for your grandmother. How did you know what information was important? Emily's story taught me that kids see things grown-ups miss, because grown-ups think we're not paying attention. But we are paying attention, especially when family members are acting weird or sad. Janet Morrison turned to me. Mrs. Gillian, your foundation has now documented over 50 cases where children's observations provided crucial evidence of financial fraud. What does this tell us about family dynamics during divorce proceedings? It tells us that people who commit financial fraud often underestimate everyone around them, their spouses and their grandchildren. They assume that being kind or trusting means being stupid, and they assume that being young means being unobservant. What advice would you give to other grandmothers who might be facing similar situations? Trust your instincts, ask questions about your family's finances, and listen to the children in your family. If a child notices that Grandpa has secrets or gets upset when they mention certain visitors, pay attention to what they're telling you. Emily, what would you say to other children who might be noticing confusing adult behavior in their families? Emily looked directly at the camera with the confidence that came from a year of speaking to lawyers, judges, and families about the importance of children's observations. I would say that if grown-ups are telling you to keep secrets from other grown-ups you love, you should tell someone you trust. And if your grandma or your mom seems sad and you don't know why, ask questions and pay attention to the answers. After the interview aired, the foundation received over 300 calls from women requesting consultations, plus dozens of calls from children who wanted to share observations about confusing family financial conversations. Mrs. Gillian, Sandra reported during our weekly staff meeting, we're going to need additional space and more volunteer attorneys to handle the demand. The television story has made us a national resource for divorce-related financial fraud cases. Sandra, what's the most common pattern you're seeing in the new cases? Husbands who've spent years convincing their wives that financial management is too complicated for them to understand, while systematically moving assets into accounts the wives can't access. And Mrs. Gillian, in about 60% of cases, children have observed planning meetings or conversations about hidden money. 6 months later, Emily and I were standing in our expanded foundation offices, which now occupied an entire floor of downtown office space and employed 12 full-time advocates plus a network of volunteer attorneys in 6 states. Grandma Kathy, look at all the thank you letters. The wall behind Emily was covered with hundreds of letters from women who'd recovered hidden assets, children who'd successfully protected family members from financial fraud, and attorneys who'd used foundation resources to challenge sophisticated financial deception. Emily, read me your favorite letter. Emily selected an envelope with careful handwriting and a return address from Minnesota. Dear Emily and Mrs. Gillian, my granddaughter Sarah is 7 years old, and she saved our family by paying attention when her grandfather thought no one was watching. Sarah noticed that Grandpa had a secret phone that he used to talk to someone named Rebecca about moving money before Grandma finds out. When Sarah told me about these conversations, I contacted your foundation, and we discovered that my husband had hidden $800,000 in accounts I'd never known existed. Sarah testified just like Emily did, and the judge awarded me all the hidden money plus damages for fraud. But most importantly, Sarah learned that children have the power to protect their families when adults make bad choices. Thank you for showing other children that paying attention and telling the truth can save their families. With gratitude, Margaret and Sarah Peterson. Emily finished reading and looked at me with the satisfaction of someone whose actions had created positive change that extended far beyond her own family. Grandma Kathy, do you think Grandpa Robert knows about all the families we've helped? I don't know, sweetheart. Why do you ask? Because maybe if he knew that his lying helped us figure out how to stop other grandpas from lying, he might feel like his bad choices accidentally did something good. I looked at my granddaughter, who at 9 years old was offering a perspective on justice, redemption, and unintended consequences that was more sophisticated than most adults achieved. Emily, do you forgive Grandpa Robert for what he did? I forgive him for hurting you, because his hurting you led to us helping all these other families. But I don't think what he did was okay, and I'm glad he had to face consequences. What's the difference? Forgiving someone means you don't stay mad at them forever. But consequences mean they learn that bad choices hurt people and they shouldn't do bad things again. 9-year-old wisdom about the difference between forgiveness and accountability, between personal healing and systemic justice. That evening, as I reviewed files from women whose cases would be heard in family courts across the country next month, I thought about the ripple effects of Emily's courage and Robert's betrayal. Robert's financial fraud had destroyed my trust and upended my life, but it had also revealed patterns of abuse that extended far beyond our family, created resources that protected hundreds of other women, and inspired children nationwide to become advocates for family members facing similar deception. Some betrayals, I had learned, could be transformed into purposes larger than the pain they initially caused. Some 9-year-olds had clearer moral vision than the adults who assumed children weren't paying attention to conversations that determined entire families' futures. And some foundations built from personal crisis could create systemic change that protected people who would never know the names of those who'd suffered first to make that protection possible. Tomorrow, Emily would start 4th grade at a school where she was known as the girl who saved her grandmother and started a foundation. Tonight, I would be grateful for the granddaughter who taught me that love sometimes required courage, that truth sometimes required risking conflict, and that justice sometimes began with the smallest voices speaking the clearest words. 2 years after the Foundation's establishment, I received an unexpected call that would test everything Emily and I had built together. The caller identified himself as Detective James Rodriguez from the Financial Crimes Division of the Memphis Police Department. Mrs. Jillian, we're investigating a case that has connections to your ex-husband, Robert Stevens, and his girlfriend, Sharon Patterson. We'd like to speak with you and your granddaughter about your experiences with Mr. Stevens's financial deception. What kind of investigation? We have evidence that Mr. Stevens and Ms. Patterson have been running a sophisticated financial fraud scheme targeting older women in divorce proceedings. Your case may have been part of a larger pattern of systematic theft from vulnerable spouses. I felt my stomach drop as I realized that Robert's betrayal of me might have been part of a broader criminal enterprise rather than a personal moral failure. Detective Rodriguez, are you saying that other women have been victimized the same way I was? We're investigating at least 12 cases where women in long-term marriages discovered that their husbands had hidden millions of dollars in assets, often with Sharon Patterson's assistance as a financial consultant. Mrs. Gillian, your foundation's work has helped us identify patterns that suggest organized fraud rather than individual cases of divorce-related deception. How can Emily and I help? Emily's testimony in your divorce case documented planning conversations that match information we've found in other cases. We need her to identify voices on recordings we've obtained and confirm details about the financial planning meetings she observed. That evening, I sat down with Emily to explain that the detective wanted to interview her about Grandpa Robert's activities, but this time as part of a criminal investigation rather than our family's divorce case. Emily, it appears that Grandpa Robert and Sharon weren't just hiding money from me. They may have been helping other men hide money from their wives too, like a business for stealing from grandmas? Something like that. The police think they taught other husbands how to move money so their wives couldn't find it, and then they got paid for helping with the stealing. Emily processed this information with the moral clarity she'd always brought to adult misconduct that didn't make sense by any reasonable standard. So Grandpa Robert wasn't just mean to you. He was mean to lots of grandmas? That's what the police are trying to figure out. Then I want to help stop them from being mean to more grandmas. 3 days later, Detective Rodriguez arrived at our house with recording equipment and photographs that would help Emily identify people she'd seen during Robert's planning meetings. Emily approached the interview with the same matter-of-fact precision she'd brought to her original court testimony. Emily, I'm going to play some audio recordings, and I want you to tell me if you recognize any of the voices. The first recording was clearly Robert's voice, discussing asset transfer strategies with someone who spoke with Sharon's distinctive tone and phrasing. That's Grandpa Robert and Sharon talking about moving money to different banks so wives can't find it. Emily, how can you be sure it's Sharon? Because she talks really fast when she gets excited about money stuff, and she always says absolutely when she agrees with things. Plus, I saw her talking to Grandpa lots of times. Detective Rodriguez played several more recordings, each documenting conversations about hiding assets, creating false financial records, and coaching husbands on how to present their wives as incompetent or mentally unstable during divorce proceedings. Emily, in these recordings, do you hear them talking about other families besides yours? Yes, they mention names like Margaret and Patricia and Susan. Sharon says she's helping their husbands protect their investments from wives who don't understand business. Did you ever see other men come to your house for meetings with Grandpa Robert and Sharon? Yes, I remember 3 different men who came for meetings. They all looked worried, and they all had wives they said were causing problems by asking questions about money. Detective Rodriguez showed Emily photographs of men who were suspected of participating in the fraud scheme. Emily identified 2 of them as visitors to our house during the months before Robert filed for divorce. Mrs. Gillian, Detective Rodriguez said after Emily's interview was complete, "Your granddaughter's testimony corroborates evidence we've gathered from bank records, hidden recording devices, and financial documents seized from Mr. Stevens and Ms. Patterson's offices." What kind of evidence? Training materials for hiding assets, template documents for forging financial records, and client lists with over 40 names of men who paid for asset concealment services. Mrs. Gillian, your ex-husband and his girlfriend were running a criminal enterprise that may have defrauded divorcing women of more than $20 million. $20 million. I tried to comprehend the scope of a fraud scheme that had turned my personal betrayal into a business model for destroying other women's financial security. Detective Rodriguez, what happens to the other victims? We're working with prosecutors to file criminal charges against Mr. Stevens, Ms. Patterson, and their clients. Additionally, the evidence will help divorce attorneys across 3 states reopen cases where women received inadequate settlements due to hidden assets. And Robert? Mr. Stevens is facing charges of conspiracy, money laundering, fraud, and racketeering. If convicted, he could receive a sentence of 15 to 20 years in federal prison. That evening, Emily and I sat on our front porch watching the sunset and trying to process the magnitude of what we'd learned about Robert's criminal activities. Grandma Kathy, are you sad that Grandpa Robert was even more bad than we thought? I'm sad for all the other women who went through what I went through. But Emily, I'm proud that our foundation helped the police figure out how to stop Grandpa Robert from hurting more families. Do you think the other grandmas will get their money back? Some of them will. And all of them will know that what happened to them wasn't their fault, that they were victims of crimes rather than people who just didn't understand financial planning. Grandma Kathy, if we hadn't fought back against Grandpa Robert, would he have kept stealing from more grandmas? Probably. Emily, your courage to tell the truth didn't just save our family. It saved families we'll never meet, women whose names we don't know, children who won't have to watch their grandmothers suffer because criminals thought no one was paying attention. So, when we helped ourselves, we accidentally helped everyone. We helped ourselves, and then we chose to use what we learned to help everyone else. There's a difference between accidental help and intentional help. Which kind is better? Intentional help is better because it means you're making a choice to care about people beyond your own family. As Emily prepared for bed that night, she asked the question that had been building throughout our conversation about Robert's broader criminal activities. Grandma Kathy, do you think there are other kids like me who notice things about their grandpas or dads hiding money? Probably. Why? Because if there are other kids who saw bad things but didn't know they were important, maybe we should teach them what to look for and who to tell. I looked at my 9-year-old granddaughter who was proposing to expand our foundation's mission to include education for children about recognizing and reporting family financial fraud. Emily, that's a wonderful idea. What would you want to teach other children? That adults who tell kids to keep secrets from other adults are usually doing something wrong. That when grandmas or moms seem sad and confused about money, kids should pay attention to why. And that telling the truth about what you see and hear can protect people you love. Some 9-year-olds, I was learning, had more sophisticated understanding of prevention and systemic change than most adults achieved in decades of professional experience. Some foundations could grow beyond their original missions when the people running them recognized that individual justice was only meaningful if it led to protection for everyone facing similar threats. And some granddaughters could transform personal trauma into public education with the moral clarity that came from understanding that love required courage, truth required risk, and protection required refusing to let harmful adults operate in secrecy and assume no one was watching. Tomorrow, Emily and I would begin developing educational programs to teach children across the country how to recognize and report family financial fraud. Tonight, I would be grateful for the granddaughter who taught me that some battles were worth fighting not just for personal victory, but for the protection of people whose names we'd never know, but whose lives could be saved by refusing to let criminals operate without consequence. 3 years after Robert's conviction and sentencing to 18 years in federal prison, I stood in the auditorium of the Memphis Convention Center, looking out at an audience of 500 women and children who'd gathered for the Catherine Gillian Foundation's 3rd annual conference on family financial protection. Emily, now 12 and poised beyond her years, was preparing to deliver the keynote address that would officially launch our Children as Financial Guardians education program, a curriculum designed to teach kids nationwide how to recognize and report family financial fraud. "Grandma Kathy," Emily said, adjusting the microphone at the podium, "are you ready to hear about everything we've accomplished?" I nodded from my seat in the front row, surrounded by foundation staff, volunteer attorneys, and women whose lives had been transformed by the resources Emily's courage had made possible. Good afternoon, everyone. 3 years ago, I was 9 years old and my grandfather was stealing money from my grandmother while planning to leave her with nothing. Today, I'm 12 years old, and our foundation has helped 847 women recover over $63 million in hidden assets. The audience applauded, but Emily continued with the matter-of-fact delivery that had characterized her approach to important presentations since her first court testimony. But the number I'm most proud of is this one. 312 children have provided testimony that helped protect their families from financial fraud. That means 312 kids learned that paying attention and telling the truth can save people they love. When I first testified about my grandfather's secret meetings and conversations about hiding money, I thought I was just helping my grandmother. But what I learned is that when you stand up to one bad person, you help protect everyone from all the bad people doing the same things. Emily paused, looking out at an audience that included children ranging from 7 to 16, all of whom had participated in documenting family financial deception. I want to tell you about some of the kids who became financial guardians for their families. 10-year-old Marcus noticed that his dad was getting mail sent to fake addresses and asking questions about his mom's retirement accounts. 14-year-old Sarah recorded conversations where her stepdad talked about moving money to other countries before their divorce was finalized. 8-year-old David saw his grandfather giving jewelry and expensive gifts to a woman who wasn't his grandmother. All of these kids learned the same thing I learned. Adults who tell children to keep secrets from other adults they love are usually doing something wrong. And when you love someone, you don't let other people hurt them just because those people are adults or family members. I watched Emily address the audience with confidence that had developed through 3 years of speaking to legal professionals, child advocacy groups, and families facing financial crisis. She'd grown from a child who'd accidentally become a witness to an advocate who deliberately chose to protect others. Our Children as Financial Guardians program teaches kids 3 important things, Emily continued. First, what financial fraud looks like in families. Second, how to document suspicious activities safely. And third, who to tell when adults are hiding money or lying about family finances. But the most important thing we teach is this. Children have the right to protect people they love, even when that means telling uncomfortable truths about adults who've made bad choices. After Emily's presentation, I joined her on stage to announce the Foundation's newest initiative, a partnership with family courts in 12 states to establish child advocacy protocols specifically designed for financial fraud cases. The Catherine Gillian Foundation has demonstrated that children's testimony is often the most reliable evidence of premeditated financial deception, I told the audience. Children observe family dynamics without agenda, remember conversations with accuracy, and report facts without the emotional complications that affect adult witnesses. Beginning this fall, family court systems in Alabama, Florida, Georgia, Tennessee, Texas, Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, Mississippi, Louisiana, Arkansas, and Kentucky will implement standardized procedures for interviewing child witnesses in divorce cases involving suspected asset concealment. This means that children who notice confusing adult behavior around money will have trained advocates to help them report what they've observed, and family court judges will have established protocols for evaluating children's testimony about financial fraud. During the question and answer session, a woman in her 60s raised her hand. "Mrs. Gillian, my granddaughter Maya documented hidden assets that helped me recover $1.8 million from my ex-husband. But my son, Maya's father, is angry that she testified against her grandfather. How do you handle family relationships when children's testimony protects one family member by exposing another?" I looked at Emily, who'd fielded similar questions at previous conferences. "May I answer this?" Emily asked, and I nodded. When adults make bad choices that hurt people, children shouldn't have to pretend those choices are okay, just to keep family relationships comfortable, Emily said. My grandfather went to prison because he committed crimes, not because I told the truth about his crimes. Maya's grandfather lost money because he stole it, not because Maya reported the stealing. Adults who get mad at children for telling the truth about their bad behavior are teaching kids that family loyalty means protecting people who hurt other family members. That's not loyalty, that's enabling. Real family loyalty means protecting people who are being hurt, even when the people hurting them are also family. As the conference concluded and families began gathering their materials and saying goodbye, I found myself standing with Emily in the now empty auditorium, looking at the stage where hundreds of women and children had shared stories of courage, recovery, and systematic change. Emily, when you testified at my divorce hearing 3 years ago, did you imagine we'd be here today? No, but I'm glad we are. Grandma Kathy, do you ever wonder what would have happened if I hadn't paid attention to Grandpa Robert's secret meetings? You would have become someone different, and so would I. And hundreds of other families would still be suffering from financial fraud that they thought was their fault. Do you think Grandpa Robert knows about all the families we've helped? I don't know, and I don't think it matters. Emily, what matters is that his crimes led to resources that protect people he'll never meet, taught children he'll never know, and created justice that extends far beyond our family. Grandma Kathy, what's the most important thing I learned from all of this? I thought about the question as we walked toward the exit. Past displays showing foundation statistics, client success stories, and photographs of children who'd chosen courage over convenience, truth over family politics, protection over politeness. What do you think is the most important thing you learned? That being small doesn't mean being powerless. That telling the truth can change everything, even when adults don't want to hear it. And that sometimes the best way to love your family is to refuse to let bad people hurt them, even when those bad people are also family. As we drove home through the Memphis streets where this journey had begun, with a phone call about divorce papers and Emily's first questions about her grandfather's secret visitors, I reflected on the transformation that had occurred in both our lives. Emily had grown from an observant 8-year-old into a confident 12-year-old advocate who understood justice, systemic change, and the difference between personal healing and public service. I had grown from a betrayed wife into a leader who'd learned to transform personal trauma into protection for others facing similar threats. Grandma Kathy, Emily said as we pulled into our driveway, when I'm grown up and have children of my own, I'm going to teach them what you taught me. What's that? That love isn't just about being nice to people. Sometimes love means being brave enough to tell uncomfortable truths, strong enough to fight for what's right, and smart enough to know the difference between protecting people and enabling them. My granddaughter of 12 years taught me that gentileza não é sinônimo de fraqueza, e que às vezes as pessoas mais pequenas carregam as verdades mais poderosas, and that the most important inheritance we can leave is not money or property, but the courage to stand up for justice, even when justice requires fighting people we love. As Emily gathered her conference materials and headed toward the house we'd saved through her testimony and my determination, I realized that some stories don't end with personal victory, but with the recognition that individual courage can become systemic change when it's shared rather than hoarded. Some 12-year-olds carry more moral authority than the adults who assume children aren't paying attention to conversations that determine entire families' futures. And some foundations built from betrayal can create protection that outlasts the people who created them, teaching generation after generation that love sometimes requires courage, that truth sometimes requires risk, and that justice sometimes begins with the smallest voices, speaking the clearest words in rooms where powerful adults assume no one is listening. The end.